Hello, everyone, and welcome to, I think this is episode 6 of the Citrix Session podcast. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. And as usual, I have with me the Director of Services at XenTegra, Bill Sutton. Bill, how's it going?
Going well today, Andy. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I may stumble a little bit in this. I took a red eye home from Salt Lake last night, so I've only slept 2 hours, and that 2 hours was on an airplane. So if I stumble a little bit, please forgive me.
Well, if you fall asleep, we'll yell at you.
I definitely won't fall asleep. So, hey guys, we're very lucky today to have Chris Fleck with us. Chris is the Vice President and Technical Fellow at Citrix. In his title here on the author site on the Citrix blogs, it actually says a self-professed tech instigator, which I really like. And Chris, before you jump into that and straighten out anything I screwed up about your title, I just want to talk real quick about how you impacted my Citrix career. You were the first person I ever saw talk about the Citrix Nirvana phone, which is this idea that we can take a phone and make it our one and only device. And because of Citrix technologies, we can access the world of Microsoft and x86 Windows and x86 applications. And I started trying that myself with an old Windows mobile phone, new at the time, my Citrix environment, and a thing called the Redfly, which would extend the Windows mobile phone. And one of the guys at Citrix, my previous manager, Damien Hanna, he saw me doing that at a conference one time, and within 3 weeks I was hired as a Citrix sales engineer. And so that was very impactful to me. I know you don't know that, but you do now.
I did not know that, and I'm smiling as you talk about that, because I'm happy to hear it. And yeah, it may have been a little ahead of its time back then, but certainly we're now seeing that capability with Apple and Samsung and a number of devices. Yeah, it's definitely rewarding to see some of these things that we anticipated a long time ago actually become reality.
And you know, the Citrix side of that equation probably was pretty close to prime time then. It's the devices and the networks that's caught up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. That's been the obstacle in the past, was the device limitations and the video out and mice working with iOS and a whole bunch of things that over time, in some cases, we've solved the issues, and in other cases, the hardware vendors themselves have done some things. So yeah, and as maybe we'll talk about today, you know, there's a lot more that we have in the queue, including not just future things, but things that are shipping now that are dramatically improved and broadened in terms of what Citrix can do.
Yeah, just a quick note on that. I mean, I hear people all the time talking about other players in the space and how they've caught up to Citrix, or they're catching up with Citrix. I'm like, I don't know, guys. 30 years, and I want to ask you about your 30-year reunion you guys had this week. But 30 years of what I call scars on your knuckles that's pretty hard to catch up to.
Yeah. The reference here is the 30-year anniversary for Citrix, and we had a great event this week, and we had actually Roger Roberts, Mark Templeton, and David Henschel all together on a panel that I had the honor of moderating and asking the questions. And it was great hearing way back to when Roger Roberts met with Ed Jacobucci and, you know, saw some of the opportunity and, you know, got things started. Obviously went through some roller coaster kind of startup learnings, and yet because of the company and the culture that was built and the ecosystem, there was quite a number of the original Citrix resellers, solution advisors, et cetera, that, you know, built careers, built businesses around Citrix that were there. And then there's actually a lot of Citrites alumni as well, like yourself, where they just feel really good about the company and the experience they had there. And I think that's because of the special culture that was built and continues. And David Henschel did a great job talking about kind of maintaining the culture and growing it, as well as our next big thing, our next BHAG, our big, hairy, audacious goal, which is We want to go after a billion users. We want to expand beyond being the best in the virtual environment, which we are, and continue to evolve the enhancements with virtual desktops and virtual apps. But we want to capture everybody else that has a job, quite frankly, because the chances are if you've got a job, you're probably using devices and applications to get that job done. And when you look at what are those applications, that includes mobile devices, mobile applications, and we've had offerings there for a while around our Xen mobile product and now our Citrix Endpoint Management to enhance and secure mobile applications. But what's new, and it's really significant, is the Citrix Workspace and what we're doing there. And it's much more than just a name change from receiver. And I know that a lot of longtime Citrix folks, they recognize receiver, and they might think, well, Citrix is just changing the name again, which we've been accused of before, right?
Yeah.
And no doubt we're guilty of that. But what we're doing now is much more than that. And that's both in terms of the functionality and the security aspect, as well as the productivity enhancements. And I think for the purposes of this podcast, we wanted to go a little deeper on the security side and what we're doing there to expand what IT organizations can do to protect and manage web and SaaS applications. And that's something that in many cases, organizations are deploying outside of Citrix. They may be using a published browser on Citrix, on XenApp in some cases, but in many cases, they're just using a standard browser to connect to a web or a SaaS app. And yet there's lots of potential issues there in doing so. And what we've done is we've come up with a new service called Citrix Access Control. So the Citrix Access Control service relies on a new component of Citrix Workspace app, again, which is the new version of receiver. And what is included there is a embedded browser. And that embedded browser, it's based on Chromium. And what that does is it allows IT to deploy web and SaaS apps to run natively. So it's actually not in a native session. It's actually running, the browser component is actually running locally on the PC or Mac or whatever. And therefore it gives local performance. And it doesn't require any back-end CPU cycles or infrastructure, but it still gives IT the ability to control and secure those web and SaaS applications. And we can do things like copy-paste control, we can do print control, we can do download control, we can add a watermark, we can do a lot of the things that IT has been traditionally using XenApp for. We can now apply to web and SaaS applications without adding a hop, without adding infrastructure, without adding logon times. We can do all of that in a fashion that we think is really opens the door to the next billion users.
So Chris, let's set you up for that, even though you did a really good job just now of jumping into it. So you wrote a blog called Access Control for SaaS and Web Apps from on-prem StoreFront, and I definitely want you to go into that a little bit. But Bill and I were talking prior to getting you on this podcast. We're pretty hardcore Citrix guys, and we know Citrix access control mechanisms from the days of MSAM and Access Gateway Advanced, where when someone was coming through a gateway, we could tag it and we could turn off channels and we could disable printing, we could disable devices and peripherals, and we want to kind of talk to you about how all the different things Citrix has done in that space to get to the point where you're talking about now, where now you're attacking, now you're providing a solution not only for the virtual app and desktop guy, but for the rest of the user population that might be kind of roguely or organically using browsers to go all kinds of places, right? So can you kind of walk us through, the MSAM, I think it was an acquisition, and all the way up to now where we've got an embedded Chromium as well as a browser service plus other things going on?
Yeah, well, so some of the earlier iterations around MSAM and the cloud gateway and some of the earlier incarnations of trying to expand beyond just virtual was to add access controls, right, to the authentication process. And if and it's obviously a value add to be able to do that and to be able to enforce multi-factor authentication if you're outside the network and maybe allow it inside the network without multi-factor, and to inspect the endpoint. And so there's a number of things that you've been able to do over time, but what's really been missing, we believe, is the full session control for a web or SaaS app. And that's what's new here, is the ability to say, all right, we're going to allow IT to make apps available to their employees like Salesforce or Workday or ServiceNow, and add this layer of control that they didn't have before. One of the things that I'm sure yourselves and many of the Citrix longtime audience have been familiar with for a long time was the content publishing, where you could use your existing StoreFront and your Citrix infrastructure, and if you wanted to just publish a link to an internal resource, for example, you could do that. And instead of launching a XenApp session, it would actually just go to a URL or a URI that you pointed to.
Yeah, I remember that.
And that was kind of, you remember that, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of folks, unfortunately, we deprecated that for a little while, and then we had a lot of people push back to say, hey, that was an awesome feature, and I depend on it. We've actually got customers that they've got literally hundreds of apps / websites / resources that they deliver to employees with that mechanism. And so we brought it back, and we made it available now as a something that you can provide with your existing StoreFront using some PowerShell commands to be able to configure it. So that is there. But what that does is it really just does the first step, which is organize. And we talk about organize and secure and automate and really trying to add value beyond just organize. And what we actually did with this new access control service is we've added there's two methods to get it. In one case, if you buy the Citrix Cloud Access Control Service with the control plane in the cloud and Citrix and the StoreFront in the cloud, then it's just there. You basically just have to, you can configure from the Citrix Cloud admin utility, and you plug in, Salesforce or Workday or whatever URLs you can. Ideally, what you want to do is make Citrix Cloud Identity Service the SAML broker for those services, and that way you're kind of preventing the backdoor method to get to those services. And by virtue of the SAML configuration, then users basically have to go to Citrix Cloud, they authenticate, and then they get single sign-on to all of these, whether it's their existing virtual apps and desktops or it's these new SaaS and web apps. and then they get the benefit of this added layer of security. Again, things like print, copy, paste, watermark, etc. And then also things like the content filtering. So if you've got a link inside your SaaS app, we also filter that, and if it's if it's categorized as unacceptable for like HR policy, we can block it. And if it's uncategorized like potential malware or real security risks, what we do is we redirect it to our secure browser service where it can open there, and a user can still be productive and see what that link leads them to, but it won't open up locally.
Right. Hey guys,
and so that,
I do want to chime in on one thing real quick here, and I think both you guys will go. You guys will agree after I say this. Chris, I'm glad you jumped into the content redirection concept, which a lot of people didn't take nearly enough advantage of. But I do want to highlight something, and you actually have it in your blog. A lot of people I've interacted with through the years, they just publish the browser as a published app with a link as part of the actual published app executable. And
right.
For a lot of our listeners, that's what they think of when they talk about using a browser in Citrix. And then you brought up the content redirection, and now we're talking about the evolution of all of that in the solutions you're talking about here.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Andy, and to walk it back just a little bit, Chris was talking about the concept of back in the early days of StoreFront and even web interface, you could publish those web links like you mentioned, Chris. A lot of customers do that or did that and maybe still do, but that plus the published app or the browser as a published app that Andy was speaking of, that only got the customer so far. If that app required authentication, the user had to enter their credentials, right? By leveraging the access controls and leveraging Citrix Cloud as the SAML or identity provider, then we can essentially federate or enable single sign-on for the user to access apps that require authentication. And then the security around that is multifold. Obviously, one of the things is IT or the business can manage access to those apps since it's tied to their AD credential, not tied to an individual credential they set up for themselves. And then obviously the other significant security issues that you mentioned, Chris, are things like embedded browser and watermarking. So it's an evolution, but the old way of doing it had significant limitations when it came to the world we live in today. And I think what I've read in the blog article, it really kind of seems to indicate that we're taking that the next step and allowing the federation of the authentication and then the other security controls. Would that be a fair statement?
Absolutely. It's really, it's an evolution from one point of view, but it's a pretty dramatic step up because what it
absolutely.
Means, because I think in a lot of cases, like you guys brought up, where traditionally web apps with Citrix meant a published XenApp browser.
Right.
And that still makes sense, by the way, for a number of use cases, but it comes with a cost, right? It comes with a cost from a back-end infrastructure perspective and a licensing perspective and a Microsoft licensing perspective and a user performance penalty, if it adds a logon cycle. So I think users and IT would like to be able to run those web and native SaaS apps locally, but often they're doing that today, but then they're doing it in a risky way. And so what we can do is effectively the best of both worlds, which is let them run it locally or natively, but do it inside this embedded browser that provides local performance, no overhead on the back end, and a really comprehensive set of security policies over the entire session, not just the authentication. And to go a little deeper on the blog, what I'm highlighting there is we now have a mechanism that allows existing Citrix customers to leverage what I'm talking about here, this access control service, without moving everything to the control plane, and specifically without moving Citrix StoreFront to the control plane. Because we know that even though ultimately that's a lot more efficient, and infrastructure makes sense to be able to do that. But we know there's lots of customers that are not able to or not ready to do that significant a step. And what we've done here is created a hybrid deployment method that allows customers to keep their existing storefront on-prem, and therefore zero impact to their existing remote access through a gateway, or zero impact to their internal users. If they see their storefront, they click on a XenApp app, or CVAD app, it just launches directly, and there's no hairpinning out to the cloud or anything else. And so that's they can keep all that as is, but they can now add SaaS apps. So right alongside those XenApp or CVAD apps, virtual apps that they've got published in storefront, their existing storefront, they can now see Salesforce and ServiceNow and Workday and all those apps, as well as internal apps. And that's actually a really big opportunity, is all of the intranets and SharePoint sites and all of the internal resources that you'd like to be able to make available to your employees, and in a lot of cases do it both inside the network, or more specifically outside the network, but do it without a VPN, for example. And we're able to do that now with this hybrid configuration. And so we've created a utility that basically runs alongside your storefront server, that synchronizes the SaaS and web app configuration that you've done in the cloud, and uses the old content publishing technique, and inserts those web and SaaS apps into your DDC and makes them visible to users in storefront. So as an admin, you can assign groups, assign users, just like you do with virtual apps, but you're doing it with the SaaS apps now and the web apps. And you're now then deploying it with these added security controls, but again, no overhead, which we think is a big deal.
Right.
So
and
Chris,
this leverages the Citrix Access Control feature in the cloud. Is that correct? Or
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So in other words, you may not be ready to put your whole control plane in the cloud, but
right.
You really like this idea of access control. Now you can have both.
Right.
You can, all right, I want access control. I want this dynamic ability to use a secure browser service, where I don't want to take risks if somebody's got malicious links inside their SaaS or web app. That's being leveraged as well. But I don't need to move my storefront, at least not now or whenever your schedule fits. You can keep that as is.
So guys, walk me through this. So I'm a user. I'm on a Mac. I've got my Workspace app, and I want to leverage this functionality. Am I connecting that Workspace app to the cloud service that I get as part of the Workspace service? Am I connecting it to my storefront? What am I connecting to, and what's the flow of the user experience?
Yeah. So what you're connecting to is your gateway, and so you do need you need to do a one-time setup to, if you want to use your credentials for Workspace app to connect to the access control. Effectively, this does depend on having the Workspace app installed. And so the Workspace app allows you to authenticate simply to your existing gateway and/or
my on-prem gateway.
Your on-prem gateway and your on-prem storefront. And what will happen is, so if you click on, again, a virtual app, there's no change. It's exactly as is. There's no hairpinning to the cloud, et cetera. But right alongside that virtual app, the end user now sees a Salesforce icon, and they click on that Salesforce icon, and what happens there is they're basically routed out to the Citrix cloud service, that the identity service that already is enabled with the single sign-on from your SAML configuration for Salesforce.
Right.
And so the user, from a user perspective, it's like a no-brainer. They don't have to do anything.
Yeah, they click on it, they get into the app. There's no other authentication required, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
This sounds to me like some gateway optimal routing magic that we've been using for other CVAD, Citrix Virtual App and desktop solutions. We're now able to basically just redirect that session, that's a bad word, that connection out through the service and take advantage of what the service can do for us.
But all of the icons relative, whether they're, I think the point here, Chris, is all of the icons are in the on-premises storefront, even though they might go different directions. One might go inside to your virtual apps and desktops environment that's on premises. Some of them may go out to access control and be federated via a service there, and then launched in the SaaS application. So they kind of go, the connection goes different directions, but it's all aggregated within the storefront on premises.
100% correct. Yep. And where this is also very relevant is for anybody that has customized their storefront.
Right.
So we know that in a lot of cases, organizations are not willing or ready to move their storefront to the cloud because they've done some customizations, either for security purposes or for graphics and identity and visuals and so forth, and therefore they want to leverage that or keep that on-prem. This works with custom storefronts as well. So it's just the same exact storefront you have now. It's just with some new icons that show up.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you may have alluded to it, I think, but explain just briefly what the goal or the objective is of the sync utility. I think I understand it, but for our listeners, try to explain exactly what that's doing. I assume that's running in the background, or is it kicked off automatically or manually, or just explain a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Okay. So it's kicked off when you configure, and you actually need to run it one time, but we can then look for updates. But you basically, what it does is it leverages through an API the cloud admin configuration, where you're actually setting the SAML and the security policies for those web apps and SaaS apps. So you're doing that like the Salesforce or the internal web apps or the Workdays. You have to do that from Citrix Cloud, from your admin account there, which is really simple, as you guys know, but probably others don't know how simple it is. It's just like a really easy web UI where you plug in some URLs and you just click on the security features that you want or not.
So Chris, real quick so this is actually pulling from Citrix Cloud that information into your storefront.
Yep, exactly. So it pulls it from the Citrix Cloud service into your storefront, and then when the user clicks on their storefront, the Salesforce app icon, what it's doing there is it's then pulling those security policies through the Workspace app. So when Salesforce launches, it has those security policies enforced, like the download controls or print or whatever. And then, on top of that, what we're doing is not only the access control security policies that I talked about, but it's also an opportunity for the analytics service to basically trigger like user behavior problems. We can trigger things like excessive downloads. So if you've got users that normally, through their everyday workings, download a certain amount of data from Salesforce, and then lo and behold, one day you've got somebody that downloaded, a terabyte of data from Salesforce. Well, that's going to set a trigger off for the admin or security or all of the above. And again, that highlights the importance of having a continuous monitoring after login, of everything going through a workspace app, through this embedded browser. We have insight to, and we can add that insight to the analytics service.
I like to bring up wiki links every time we start talking about that. Just the watermark or the ability to see some guy pulling a ton of data down that he normally doesn't. That's an easy one to talk about this service and what it can do for you.
Right, and it's something that quite frankly, most organizations are taking big risks on today when they deliver apps just through a standard browser. They might think that they're protecting them, and they are maybe with the upfront authentication. But that doesn't help for internal bad apples, and it doesn't help for a lot of scenarios that we can add value to.
Hey, Bill, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said, Chris, and I think there's the original concern when it came to these SaaS apps. I think back when they really started to take off was the whole access. Or the authentication piece, which has largely been solved, but a lot of customers are still creating local users and passwords, usernames and passwords in Salesforce, or local usernames and passwords, and I say local to the app itself, as opposed to federating them. And the original thinking about federation was, let's create a scenario where we don't have all these usernames and passwords that are written on Post-it notes underneath the keyboard or something for the Bank of America app or the Salesforce app or the investments app that the finance people might use. Let's federate it and create just let them use their AD account. But this adds so much more that wasn't thought of back then, like the watermarking, like the secure browser, like the content filtering. And I think that's a piece of it that really adds a lot of value and a lot of compelling reasons to move this direction.
Yeah, I think we're running low on time maybe, but we should probably do a session also on app protection, which applies here as well. But just briefly for the listeners, another layer of security that we can add to HDX, traditional Citrix virtual apps and desktops, plus web apps and SaaS apps, including in this hybrid configuration, is this feature called app protection. And what that does is we can protect against screen capture or keystroke loggers. So even if the employee is logging in from an unmanaged, untrusted device, what we can do is, again, by virtue of this added value we've built into Workspace app, we can prevent screen captures from anything launched from Workspace app, as well as we can protect from keystroke loggers that might even be installed on the machine. Anything you type inside an app that was delivered and running through Workspace app is invisible to a keystroke logger. So that's a big deal.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that came up at a meeting yesterday as well, the ability to scrape the screen or capture the keys as they're being typed. That's the final frontier, right? We've all talked about that one for years, and preventing them from taking a picture with their phone. I guess that's the last one to solve, but the screen scrape and the key logger is certainly important. Yep,
and that's in fact the watermark is there for the take a picture scenario, so It really does cover the bases.
So Chris, you're right. We're running out of time, but I definitely want to have you back as often as you want to jump on with us. I would love during Citrix Synergy or the Summit conference to walk around to the different Citrix displays and talk with you through some of this and maybe record it. That would be awesome. That's something I've always wanted to do. But looking on your author site here for the Citrix blogs, there's several on there, a bunch on there that I would love to talk to you about. Some, to be honest, the concept of this podcast came about because myself and Bill and others, we just wanted to learn more, and then we thought we'd record it for other people to enjoy as well. But looking at your list here, something as simple as the X1 mouse, I know that's trivial for a lot of people, but there's a whole lot of people that have no idea how valuable that can be. You got something on here around local app access, I love local app access as my fallback to making anything work inside a virtual desktop if I need, or pretend or seem to work inside a virtual desktop. So I would love to do this again, once a week if you got time, but it's whatever fits your calendar.
Sure. Well, I enjoyed it, and I do appreciate your efforts getting the word out, because it's not your old Citrix anymore.
No, it's not.
We're not, just to clarify, we're not walking away from virtual. We're still the best, and we're going to continue to invest there. But in order to reach 1 billion users, we've got to go web, SaaS, local, and mobile, and we're doing all of the above.
Yeah, I've been a big proponent of making sure everybody knows that the old Citrix, which a lot of people didn't take full advantage of, there's a ton of features in that people don't know and haven't used, and we try to highlight some of those in these podcasts. But yeah, we got to keep going. We can't stand still, but we're going to be the best at both.
Yep. All right. Great to chat.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks for joining. I appreciate it, and then we'll do it again down the road. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.